Now there were attempts attempts of the people themselves to organize themselves and bargain for better working conditions from the people who owned the land. I showed you this the last time, but I'm showing it to refresh your memory. In 1903, in Oxnard, actually before it became a city, was owned by the Oxnard brothers. The people who were the field hands in Oxnard, they were Japanese and Mexicans, and you can see them both in this picture. They organized what was called the Japanese Mexican Labor Association, and they engaged in a little bit of a strike against Oxnard. And you know, in the agricultural industry, the critical time is the harvest time, and these people who were working in the fields knew, and they did their strike right as harvest was about to begin. And what happened was that the Oxnard people had to give them slightly higher wages and slightly higher working conditions. So this was the one of the first agricultural actions taken by laborers in the California fields in 1903. And then what happened was very interesting. The leadership was actually Mexican. Because there were more Mexicans than Japanese in the field, and they petitioned to get the Japanese Mexican Labor Association to be admitted into the fledgling union movement, which was being organized around the country, called the American Federation of Labor. And the head of the American Federation of Labor, Samuel Gompers, who was the head of the Cigar Makers Union, told the Mexican leadership of this organization that they would be fine, but the only condition under which they would be admitted to the American Federation of Labor is if there were no Japanese involved. And they refused to accept that, and they were not recognized by the AFL, and very quickly, and within a couple of years, the Labor Association had pretty much dissolved. Another interesting thing that happens, and I'm going to move this back a little bit here, I guess, to get it bigger, get the whole thing there. Here we go. Okay. At the same time, in the first decade of the 20th century, the American Federation of Labor was fighting against another labor organization called the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW. Which was which you can see from, I'm going to move this back a little bit more so you can get a better sense. Whoops. This is why I am not a technical person here. There we go. Let me just see if I can get this back there. Okay. I need to move this back a little bit. How about if I do that back there? There we go. There we go. Okay, now I don't get the top there. There we go. The Industrial Workers of the World, the American Federation of Labor was organized according to crafts. So the Cigar Makers Union, the Musicians Union, like remember Mayor Schmitz of San Francisco was the president of the Musicians Union. So they organized people according to craft. The IWW wanted to organize everybody into what the poster on the left says is one big union. Everybody, all workers, we have more in common than not. And they organized. They took up in the 19 teens. They tried to organize some of the agricultural workers in California. And you can see that it was not an easy thing. Their background, as you can see from both of these posters, you got the smokestacks on the left, and you've got people working in factories on the right. Their background was industrial stuff, but they did try, and you can see from this map here, they tried and they organized a number of strikes on the West Coast, and most of these strikes were from agricultural workers. In California, the biggest one involved this crop. Now, if I were in class, if we were at the library, I would say, did anybody recognize this crop? And maybe one of you would say, oh yes, that's a hop, which is true. The hop, which is very, very big for beer. And hops were grown outside of wheatland in northern California. And in 1913, there's a group, the brothers who owned this particular hop farm outside of Wheatland were the Durst brothers. And there's what they had done is they had advertised in the local newspapers for workers to come and work in the harvest. They wanted about 2,500 workers for, it's going to be for about a month or so. But because of a temporary depression in some local areas, they got about 7,000 or 8,000 workers. So they were able to hire the people that they wanted on very, very low wages. And what happened was the IWW moved in, and in August of 1913 they went on strike. And you can see on the left it says the Durst Hop Ranch, the site of the Wheatland Hop Riot. The IWW was a radical and violent organization, and some of their organizers were not at all opposed to using a lot of violence. And so what they did was there was very quickly armed conflict between the local sheriff and some of the more radical union organizers. Violence broke out. A sheriff was killed. Another couple of people were wounded. Other sheriff's departments from around the area came in and put down the strike very, very quickly. These two gentlemen, the two union leaders, Richard Ford and H.D. Sir, were sent to prison. And both of them spent, I believe, about 20 years in prison. They weren't accused of the murders themselves. They were union organizers, but they were local people. They weren't the IWW organizers who came from elsewhere. But they were both sent to prison, and the strike was violently put down. And so, the problem with agricultural organizing was that it was very, very difficult to do because then, as continued throughout the time, people, these people who worked in the field, they went from one concern to another, depending on what was being harvested when. So they weren't a stable work population, and the local authorities were very, very much opposed to any kind of activity. So during the 1930s. The only people who were really interested in trying to organize workers, who by this time were largely, in the beginning of the 1930s, they were largely Mexicans, were the communists. And you can see from the sign in the back here that Carolyn Decker was a communist. These were trying to organize farm workers in Tulare County. But you can see from the sign in the back, the comrades, the fighting, and comrades, of course, was a favorite term of the Communist Party back in the 30s. And so there were a whole bunch of efforts to organize some of these people. And they did organize some in Tulare County. There was a cotton picker strike in 1933, which the Communist Party organized. And there are some of the strikers taunting the local sheriff's people who came to try to break the strike. There's another group of strikers, and the sign says, "Disarm the rich farmer or arm the worker for self-defense." Again, that was a very, very, the American Federation of Labor would never have supported such a potentially violent kind of sign. But the communists, of course, were different. There were other efforts to organize other kinds of people associated with agriculture, cannery workers. So there was an attempt to organize tuna workers in 1931 in San Diego, and there were a couple of attempts to organize cannery workers in San Jose and Santa Clara in the 1930s. Those of you who have lived here older probably remember that behind Santa Clara University, there used to be a whole bunch of canneries. And when I first came in '69. There were canneries all around there, with right next to the railroad tracks. And you could see the changing of shifts, and there were huge numbers of people. And so there were efforts to organize these. There were also efforts to organize, this is cotton pickers in Pixley, and there was again a strike there. There are workers again. These people are trying to resist the cotton strike. These are strike breakers. Violence breaks out, as it did a lot of times, because the local authorities were very, very allied with the growers. And so you can see, and let me get this over here if I can. There we go. There were vegetable picker strikes in the Imperial Valley. There were cannery worker strikes. There were a whole bunch of things, but most of them were dramatically unsuccessful. And so the basic situation remained that the agricultural land was large, and the people who were working the land were of a different and much significantly less powerful ethnic group than the people who owned the land. You can see the San Jose move. That's when some of the cannery workers were were marching downtown San Jose to City Hall, and you can see the San Jose News. The marchers were not marchers; they were a strike mob. Well, mechanization becomes very, very important in California agriculture in the 50s and 60s on some crops. This thing was a very, very famous a machine, the tomato harvester. I forget who was marketing it, but one of their marketing things, and what they did was they put an egg in the bottom there, and then the egg came out from the top completely unbroken. So, but in large numbers, of industries, of crops, that simply was not possible to really happen at all.